The thunder of hooves broke the stillness of the prairie dawn as Dr. Theodora Porter rushed to pull her hastily knitted shawl around her shoulders, her medical bag already in hand. Sunrise in Cedar Springs, Wyoming Territory, 1876, meant one thing these days. Xander Daniels was bringing her another patient. Theodora Thea, to the few people she considered friends, had barely finished pinning her chestnut hair into a serviceable bun when the familiar silhouette of the cowboy appeared on the horizon, this time with a wagon rather than just his stallion. That meant someone was too injured to ride. "Doc Porter," Xander's deep voice carried across the distance as he approached her small cabin that doubled as her medical practice. "Got a man with a mining accident, crushed leg." Thea nodded briskly, her mind already cataloging the instruments she'd need. At 26, she'd seen her share of crushed limbs, both during her unconventional medical training back east and in the 2 years since she'd established herself in this frontier town. "Bring him inside, Mr. Daniels," she called, pushing open the door to her examination room. "And please tell me you've applied the tourniquet as I showed you." Xander, tall and broad-shouldered with sun-weathered skin and piercing blue eyes, gave a curt nod as he pulled the wagon to a stop. "Did it just like you taught me, Doc. Pressure point first, then the band above the wound." The sight no longer surprised Thea, this rough-hewn cowboy with his calloused hands delicately caring for wounded men. In the 8 months since he'd first appeared at her door with a bullet wound in his shoulder, Xander Daniels had become something of a medical assistant by proxy. He seemed to have appointed himself her unofficial patient finder, bringing her those who needed help from the far reaches of the territory. The injured miner moaned as they transferred him to Thea's examination table. His left leg was a mangled mess below the knee, blood seeping through the makeshift bandages. "What's his name?" Thea asked, cutting away the blood-soaked fabric. "Marcus Reeves. New to the Silverbell mine. Rockfall caught him working a new seam." Xander stood back, hat in hand, but ready to assist if called upon. "Mr. Reeves," Thea spoke firmly as she examined the damage. "I'm Dr. Porter. I need to clean this wound and likely remove what's left of your lower leg. The pain will be substantial." The miner, pale and sweating, nodded weakly. "Do what you must, madam." Thea turned to Xander. "I'll need you to hold him down. I have chloroform, but not enough for a long operation." Without hesitation, Xander moved to the head of the table, placing strong hands on the man's shoulders. "I'm here, Doc. Just tell me what you need." Hours later, with the miner stabilized and sleeping under the influence of laudanum, Thea finally stepped outside her cabin, wiping blood from her hands with a rag. Xander sat on her porch steps, whittling a piece of wood, patient as always. "He'll live," she said, collapsing onto the step beside him. "Though he'll need to find work that doesn't require 2 good legs." Xander nodded, his knife stilling. "There's clerical work at the mining company office. I'll speak to the foreman." Thea glanced at him sideways. This was their routine now she saved them, and he found ways to help them afterward. It was an unspoken partnership that had developed naturally over time. "You didn't have to wait," she said, though she was glad for his company. Wanted to make sure Reeves pulled through. Xander resumed his whittling. Besides, got nowhere pressing to be. Thea knew that wasn't entirely true. As foreman of the Rocking D Ranch, Xander Daniels had plenty of responsibilities. Yet here he sat, carving what appeared to be a small wooden horse, seemingly content to waste hours of daylight on her porch. "How did you find him so quickly after the accident?" she asked. "Was delivering a message to the mine owner when I heard the commotion." He blew wood shavings from the small figurine. "Figured you were the closest doctor. Closest good doctor, anyway." Thea felt the familiar warmth of pride mixed with irritation. "I'm the only doctor for 100 miles, Mr. Daniels, regardless of whether you think I'm good or not." His blue eyes caught hers, serious beneath the brim of his hat. "You're the only doctor worth riding 100 miles for, Dr. Porter, man or woman." Something in his tone made Thea's breath catch. She looked away first, suddenly aware of how unkempt she must appear after the surgery, hair escaping her bun, sleeves rolled up, and waistcoat spattered with blood despite her apron. "Yes, well, thank you for bringing him to me so promptly. The tourniquet likely saved his life." Xander stood, tucking the wooden horse into her apron pocket with a movement so swift she barely registered it until she felt the weight there. "For your collection," he said. "Figure you could use something that's not bleeding or broken for a change." Before she could respond, he placed his hat back on his head, touched the brim in a respectful gesture, and strode toward his horse. "Mr. Daniels," she called after him. "You're due to have those stitches removed from your hand tomorrow." He turned, walking backward for a few steps. "I'll be here at noon, Doc. Save me a biscuit if you're baking." Thea watched him ride away, the wooden horse heavy in her pocket. It was only after he disappeared over the ridge that she allowed herself to examine it, a perfectly carved stallion, rearing on its hind legs, every muscle and sinew detailed with remarkable precision. It would join the small menagerie forming on her bookshelf a robin, a jackrabbit, a coyote, all delivered in the same manner over the past months. Tokens of appreciation, she'd told herself. Nothing more. But as she placed the horse alongside the others, Thea Porter couldn't ignore the flutter in her chest or the way her fingers lingered on the smooth wooden surface, warm from being carried in Xander's pocket. The next day brought relentless summer heat to Cedar Springs, turning the dirt roads to dust that clung to everything. Thea had just finished checking on Marcus Reeves, who was resting as comfortably as could be expected, when she heard the now familiar sound of Xander's horse approaching. He arrived precisely at noon, as promised, though Thea noticed immediately that something was different. He'd trimmed his beard, and instead of his usual work clothes, he wore a clean shirt under his leather vest. His dark hair, usually hidden under his hat, was damp as if recently washed. "Right on time, Mr. Daniels," she said, gesturing him inside. "And looking uncommonly presentable, I might add." A hint of color touched his tan cheeks. "Figured I ought not to track half the territory's dirt into your surgery," he said, removing his hat as he stepped through the doorway. Thea busied herself with gathering supplies to hide her smile. "Have a seat and let me see that hand." Xander sat at her small table, stretching out his right hand. 2 weeks earlier, he'd caught it on a rusty nail while mending a fence. The wound had been deep, requiring 7 stitches. "Been keeping it clean?" Thea asked, gently unwrapping the bandage. "Yes, madam. Washed it morning and night, just like you ordered." Thea examined the healing wound with professional detachment, though she was acutely aware of how close they were sitting, her small hands cradling his large, calloused one. "The infection's cleared nicely," she observed. "I'll remove these stitches, but you'll need to be careful with it for another week or so." Xander watched her work, seemingly comfortable with her proximity. "How's Reeves doing?" "As well as can be expected. The fever hasn't taken hold, which is promising." Thea carefully snipped each stitch with her small scissors. "He asked for you this morning, wanted to thank you for getting him here so quickly." Xander shrugged. "Just did what needed doing." That was his way, dismissing acts of heroism as if they were as ordinary as saddling a horse. Thea had seen him bring in patients from miles away, often riding through the night with injured men tied to their saddles. She'd witnessed him lift men twice his size, hold them down during painful procedures without flinching, and comfort terrified children with a gentleness that belied his rough exterior. "There," she said, removing the last stitch. "Good as new, though you'll have a scar to show for your carelessness." "Another one for the collection," he said with a half smile, "though this one's prettier than most, thanks to your fine needlework." Thea felt her cheeks warm at the compliment as she applied a small amount of salve to the healing wound. "Keep it clean, Mr. Daniels. No more plunging it into cattle troughs or whatever it is you cowboys do all day." His laugh was unexpected, a rich, deep sound that she'd heard only rarely. "Is that what you think I do all day, Doc? Dunk my hands in dirty water and look for trouble? Am I wrong?" she challenged, wrapping a clean, light bandage around his hand. "Most days," he admitted, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Though I do seem to find more than my share of folks needing a doctor. For which I should probably thank you," Thea said, tying off the bandage. "You've single-handedly kept my practice solvent these past months." Reckon folks just needed to see that a woman doctor was just as good, better, even than the alternatives. Thea gave him a skeptical look as she packed away her supplies. Are you suggesting you've been bringing me patients as some form of advertisement, Mr. Daniels? He stood, towering over her small frame, but there was nothing threatening in his posture. I'm suggesting that Cedar Springs was lucky to get you, Dr. Porter, even if some folks were too stubborn to see it at first. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. When she'd first arrived in Cedar Springs, fresh from her unconventional medical training at the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania, the town had been less than welcoming. The previous doctor, an elderly man with a fondness for whiskey and bloodletting, had left behind patients who viewed medical care with suspicion at best. It had been an uphill battle to establish herself, made harder by her gender and youth. Many potential patients had ridden the extra 20 miles to Clearwater rather than trust a lady doctor. Well, she said, struggling to maintain her professional demeanor, I do believe I promised you a biscuit for your trouble. That you did, Xander agreed, following her to the small kitchen area. Though I'd have come anyway. Thea busied herself with a plate of biscuits she'd baked that morning, aware that her hands weren't as steady as they should be. To check on Mr. Reeves, naturally. To see you, Doc. The simple statement hung in the air between them. Thea turned slowly, plate in hand, to find Xander watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Mr. Daniels, Xander, he corrected gently. Think after all this time you might call me by my given name. Xander, she repeated, the name feeling intimate on her tongue. I'm not sure what you're implying, but a pounding at the door interrupted whatever she might have said. Thea set down the plate and hurried to answer it, finding a breathless young boy on her doorstep, Doc Porter. Ma says come quick, it's Pa. The wagon rolled on him when the brake broke. Thea was already reaching for her medical bag. Where, Tommy? Our farm, madam, 3 miles east. Xander appeared beside her, hat already back on his head. I'll saddle your horse, Doc. No need, she said, grabbing her shawl. I'll ride with Tommy. His horse can carry double for that distance. I'll follow with supplies, Xander insisted, already striding toward the barn where Thea kept her gentle mare. Might need splints, bandages. There was no time to argue. Minutes later, Thea was riding behind young Tommy Hawkins, her medical bag clutched tightly, while Xander followed on his stallion, leading her mare loaded with additional supplies. The scene at the Hawkins farm was chaotic. Jacob Hawkins lay pinned beneath an overturned wagon, his wife Martha trying desperately to comfort him while keeping their younger children back from the scene. Dr. Porter's here, Jacob, Martha called to her husband, relief evident in her voice, and Mr. Daniels from the rocking D. Thea slid from the horse and rushed to assess the situation. The wagon had Jacob pinned from the waist down, and from the unnatural angle of his right leg, she could tell it was badly broken. We need to lift this wagon, she said, looking to Xander. He nodded, already removing his vest. Mrs. Hawkins, do you have any sturdy planks? Fence posts in the barn, Tommy volunteered. Fetch them, Xander instructed. And rope, lots of rope. While Tommy ran to gather supplies, Thea knelt by Jacob's head, checking his pulse and pupils. Mr. Hawkins, can you feel your legs? The farmer grimaced. Right one's on fire. Left feels strange pins and needles. That was both good and bad news. Pain meant nerve function, but the tingling in the left leg worried her. Xander returned with Tommy, arms full of wooden planks and coils of rope. With quick efficiency, he constructed a lever system, positioning the planks to lift the wagon while disturbing Jacob as little as possible. Dr. Porter, he said, all business now. Once I lift this, you'll need to pull him clear. Be careful of his spine. Thea nodded, positioning herself by Jacob's shoulders. Martha took up position at his hips, ready to help. On 3, Xander said, bracing himself against the makeshift lever. 1, 2, 3. With a tremendous effort, he forced the lever down, lifting the wagon just enough. Thea and Martha pulled Jacob free as gently as possible, the man groaning in agony despite their care. Once clear, Thea did a quick assessment. The right leg was definitely broken in at least 2 places. The left leg showed signs of crushing injury, but no obvious fracture. Most concerning was the pallor of his skin and the rapid, thready pulse. We need to get him inside, she ordered, already preparing a dose of laudanum for the pain. Xander lifted Jacob as if he weighed nothing. carrying him carefully into the Hawkins' modest home and laying him on the bed Martha hurriedly prepared. For the next 2 hours, Thea worked to set Jacob's broken leg, clean and dress his wounds, and assess for internal injuries. Through it all, Xander stayed, helping to hold the man still during the worst of the pain, fetching water and clean linens, and keeping the children occupied with stories when their wide-eyed fear became too much for Martha to handle. By late afternoon, Jacob was resting as comfortably as could be expected, his leg splinted and bandaged, a dose of laudanum dulling the worst of his pain. "He'll need to stay off that leg for at least 6 weeks, Thea told Martha as they stepped outside to speak privately. "And I'll need to check him regularly to make sure there's no infection." Martha's face fell. 6 weeks, but the crop's the harvest is coming. "I know it's difficult," Thea said gently, "but if he tries to work too soon, he could lose the leg entirely." From behind them, Xander spoke up. "Mrs. Hawkins, the Rocking D will send men to help with your harvest. Consider it done." Martha turned to him, tears springing to her eyes. "Mr. Daniels, we couldn't possibly, it's already decided," he said firmly. "I'll have 2 men here tomorrow to start getting things in order. No arguments." The relief on Martha's face was palpable. "Thank you. I don't know how we can repay such kindness." "No need," Xander said simply. "That's how things work out here. We help each other." As they prepared to leave, Thea found herself watching Xander as he gave Tommy instructions on caring for his father overnight. There was nothing condescending in his manner. He spoke to the boy as he would to any ranch hand, with clear expectations and confidence in his abilities. The sun was setting by the time they mounted their horses for the ride back to town. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the golden light of dusk painting the prairie in warm hues. "That was a kind thing you did," Thea finally said. "Offering your men for the harvest." Xander shrugged. "It's what neighbors do. The Rocking D is hardly neighboring the Hawkins place. It's a good 15 miles. Out here, anyone within a day's ride is a neighbor," he replied. Then, after a moment, "Besides, you'd have done the same if you could." "I'm not sure what a doctor could offer in the way of harvesting," she said with a small laugh. "You offer what you can," Xander said simply. "Same as everyone." They rode a bit further before he spoke again. "Been meaning to ask you something, Doc." "Yes, town dance is Saturday next. Thought you might like to attend. With me, that is." The invitation was so unexpected that Thea nearly pulled her horse to a stop. In the 2 years she'd lived in Cedar Springs, she'd attended only one town social function, a disaster that had ended with her treating 3 drunken cowboys for knife wounds while the rest of the town looked on disapprovingly. "I don't dance, Mr. Daniels." "Xander," he corrected again. "And everyone can dance, some just do it better than others." "That's not," she began, then sighed. "What I mean is, I'm not sure it would be appropriate. I'm the town doctor. I should maintain a certain professional distance." He guided his horse a bit closer to hers. "Seems to me you've maintained more than enough distance. Town's starting to respect you now. Might do them good to see you're human, too." "Is that how you see me?" she asked. As human, in the fading light, she could see his smile. "Most definitely human, Dr. Porter, one of the finest I've met." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. "I'll consider it," she said finally. "That's all I ask." He tipped his hat to her as they reached the edge of town. "Think on it. Might be nice to spend an evening not elbow deep in someone else's troubles." As he rode off toward the ranch, Thea found herself watching his retreating figure longer than was strictly necessary. The town dance, with Xander Daniels. The very idea was preposterous. And yet, as she stabled her mare and made her way back to her cabin, she couldn't help but wonder what it might be like to spend an evening in his company that didn't involve blood, broken bones, or dying patients. For the first time in a long while, Theodora Porter found herself thinking about the blue dress packed away in her trunk, the one she'd brought from Philadelphia, with some vague notion that she might need it someday. Perhaps someday had finally arrived. The next few days passed in a blur of patients and house calls. Word of Jacob Hawkins' accident and treatment spread, bringing a steady stream of farmers and their families to Thea's door. Some came with actual ailments. Others seemed to be sizing her up, curious about the woman doctor who'd saved their neighbor. True to his word, Xander had sent 2 capable ranch hands to the Hawkins farm. When Thea rode out to check on Jacob, she found the place bustling with activity, the men from the Rocking D working alongside Tommy as if they'd been there all along. Jacob was recovering well, though he chafed at the confinement. "Don't know how to thank you, Doc," he said as she examined his leg. "Or Mr. Daniels. Martha says he's been by twice to check on how things are progressing." "He takes his responsibilities seriously," Thea replied, rewrapping the splint. "More than that," Jacob said. "He's a good man. Not many ranch foremen would spare hands during the busy season." Thea couldn't argue with that assessment. The more she learned about Xander Daniels, the more layers she discovered beneath his quiet exterior. On her way back to town, she found herself detouring toward the Rocking D, telling herself it was merely professional courtesy to update Xander on his patient's condition. The ranch was impressive, one of the largest operations in the territory, with a sprawling main house, bunkhouses for the hands, and various outbuildings spread across the property. She found Xander in the corral, working with a spirited young horse. He hadn't noticed her approach, giving Thea a rare opportunity to observe him unawares. He moved with an easy confidence around the nervous animal, his voice a low, soothing murmur that she couldn't quite make out. There was a gentleness to his hands that contradicted their strength, the same hands she'd seen lift injured men, yet could carve delicate wooden figures. The horse eventually settled, allowing Xander to stroke its neck. It was only then that he looked up and saw her waiting by the fence. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by a pleased smile that made Thea's pulse quicken embarrassingly. "Doc Porter," he said, securing the horse before approaching. "Everything all right in town?" "Everything's fine," she assured him. "I was checking on Mr. Hawkins and thought I'd stop by with an update. His leg is healing nicely. Glad to hear it." Xander reached the fence, leaning his forearms on the top rail, was planning to ride out there tomorrow. "Your men are doing good work," she said. "The Hawkins family is very grateful, just doing what's needed." He studied her for a moment. "You rode all this way just to tell me Hawkins is mending." Thea felt heat rising to her cheeks. "I also wanted to thank you. Your assistance with my patients has been invaluable." "Happy to help," he said, his blue eyes holding hers. "Though I suspect there's something else on your mind, Doc." She took a deep breath. "About the dance this Saturday changed your mind." There was no pressure in his tone, just simple curiosity. "Actually, I was going to say yes. If the invitation still stands." The smile that spread across his face was worth any potential impropriety. "It stands. I'll call for you at 7. 7 would be fine." Thea was suddenly very conscious of her practical riding clothes and wind-tousled hair. "I should get back. I have patients to see this afternoon." Xander nodded, still smiling. "Saturday at 7 then. Looking forward to it, Dr. Porter." "Theodora," she said impulsively. "If I'm to call you Xander, then you should call me Theodora or Thea. My friends call me Thea." "Thea," he repeated, as if testing the feel of it. "It suits you." She rode away feeling strangely light-headed, wondering what exactly she'd just agreed to. By Saturday evening, Thea had changed her mind no fewer than 4 times about attending the dance. The blue dress, when she finally unpacked it, seemed both too fancy and hopelessly outdated for a frontier town social. Her hair, usually confined to its practical bun, refused to cooperate with her attempts at a more sophisticated style. At 6:45, she was still standing before her small mirror, wondering if she should send a note of apology to the Rocking D when a knock came at her door. Taking a deep breath, she opened it to find Xander standing on her porch, hat in hand. He traded his usual work clothes for a clean black suit that fit his broad shoulders surprisingly well. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his beard to perfection. But it was the look in his eyes as he took in her appearance that stole Thea's breath. No man had ever looked at her that way, as if she were something precious and rare. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Thea smoothed the skirt of her blue dress self-consciously. "It's rather old-fashioned, I'm afraid. I haven't had occasion to wear it since I left Philadelphia." "It's perfect," Xander assured her, offering his arm. "Shall we?" The town hall was transformed for the occasion, with lanterns strung across the ceiling and tables laden with food along one wall. A small group of musicians played near the front, and couples were already dancing. Their entrance caused a brief lull in the conversation, heads turning to stare at the woman doctor in her blue dress on the arm of the rocking DTK's foreman. Thea felt her resolve wavering, but Xander's steady presence beside her gave her courage. "Doctor Porter," Martha Hawkins approached them, beaming. "How wonderful to see you here, and looking so lovely too." "Thank you, Mrs. Hawkins," Thea replied, relaxing slightly. "How is Mr. Hawkins this evening? Cantankerous as ever, but healing well thanks to you." Martha turned to Xander. "And Mr. Daniels, we can't thank you enough for your men. Tommy says they've nearly finished the north field already." As Martha moved on to greet other guests, more townspeople approached, some to thank Thea for her medical care, others to discuss ranch business with Xander. What struck Thea most was the easy respect with which everyone addressed her, a far cry from the suspicious glances she'd received when she'd first arrived. "See," Xander murmured as they finally made their way to the refreshment table. "Told you they were coming around." "I believe you may have had something to do with that," Thea replied, accepting a cup of punch from him. He shook his head. "You did that all on your own, Doc Thea. All I did was point folks in the right direction." Before she could respond, the music changed to a lively reel, and Xander set down his cup. "Dance with me," Thea hesitated. "I haven't danced in years. I'll likely step all over your feet." "I'll risk it," he said, holding out his hand. And somehow, despite her protests, Thea found herself in the middle of the dance floor, Xander's hand warm at her waist as he guided her through the steps. She was stiff at first, too conscious of the eyes watching them, but Xander's easy confidence was infectious. "Just follow me," he said close to her ear. "Like when we're working on a patient, we already know how to move together." The observation was startlingly accurate. They had developed a rhythm over months of working side by side, anticipating each other's movements, communicating with glances and subtle gestures. Dancing, Thea discovered, wasn't so different. By the third dance, she was laughing as Xander spun her across the floor, her earlier self-consciousness forgotten. During a pause in the music, as they caught their breath at the edge of the dance floor, Sheriff Miller approached them. "Evening, Doc Daniels," he greeted them. "Good to see you both enjoying yourselves for a change." "Sheriff," Xander nodded respectfully. "Been meaning to thank you, Doc," the sheriff continued. "That salve you made for my wife's hands worked wonders. She's asking if you might show her how to make it." "I'd be happy to," Thea replied, pleasantly surprised by the request. The sheriff turned to Xander. "Any news on those cattle thieves working the North Range?" "Nothing solid," Xander replied. "But we've doubled the night patrols. If they try the Rocking D, they'll regret it." After the sheriff moved on, Thea gave Xander a curious look. "Cattle thieves. Nothing for you to worry about," he assured her. "Just some trouble up near the territory line. The Rocking D can handle it." But there was something in his tone that gave Thea pause. Before she could press the issue, the music began again, and Xander led her back to the dance floor. As the evening progressed, Thea found herself genuinely enjoying the company of the townspeople she'd been treating for 2 years, but had never truly known. Wives shared recipes and home remedies, asking her opinion on their efficacy. Men who had once refused to let a woman doctor treat them now greeted her with respect, some even admitting that their wives had been right about her skills all along. And through it all, Xander remained at her side, his steady presence a comfort in what could have been an overwhelming situation. He seemed to know everyone, exchanging easy conversation with ranchers and shopkeepers alike, but his attention invariably returned to Thea. When the night grew late and the music slowed, Xander led her outside for a breath of fresh air. The stars above Cedar Springs were a brilliant canopy, the Milky Way a luminous streak across the dark sky. "Thank you for tonight," Thea said, wrapping her shawl more tightly around her shoulders against the evening chill. "I didn't realize how much I needed to. Belong, I suppose." "You've always belonged," Xander said quietly. "Some folks just took longer to see it." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, looking up at the stars. "My father used to say that the sky out west was God's finest canvas," Thea said. "I never understood what he meant until I came here. Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was." Thea smiled at the memory. He was a doctor, too. Taught me everything he could before sending me to medical school. He believed women had just as much right to practice medicine as men. He'd be proud of what you've built here, Xander said, his voice gentle. I hope so. She turned to look at him in the moonlight. What about your family? You've never mentioned them. A shadow crossed his face. Not much to tell. Father died in the war. Mother remarried, moved back east. Haven't seen her in 15 years. I'm sorry, Thea said, instinctively reaching to touch his arm. Xander covered her hand with his own. Don't be. Found my own family out here. The rocking Dietikes been good to me. The music from inside floated out to where they stood, a slow waltz that seemed to match the rhythm of Thea's quickening heart. One more dance, Xander asked, not releasing her hand. Here, now, why not? Better view than inside. And so they danced under the stars, with only the moon as witness. Xander held her closer than propriety might allow, but Thea found she didn't mind. There was something right about being in his arms, something that felt like coming home after a long journey. When the music ended, they remained standing close together, neither willing to break the moment. Thea, Xander said softly, his hand warm against her back. I've been wanting to ask you something. Her breath caught. Yes. But whatever he intended to say was interrupted by the sound of hooves pounding up the street. A rider came into view, pushing his horse hard. Doc Porter, he shouted, spotting them outside the hall. Doc Porter, we need you. Xander's arms fell away as Thea stepped forward. I'm here. What's happened? The rider, whom Thea recognized as one of the rocking D hands, pulled his lathered horse to a stop. It's bad, Doc, real bad. Raiders hit the North Line cabin, 2 men shot. One's bleeding something awful. Xander was already moving. Who? Davis and young Riley. They jumped the night patrol. Riley took one in the chest, Davis in the shoulder. Where are they now? Thea asked, mentally cataloging what supplies she would need. Brought them to the ranch. Boss thought it was closer than town. Xander turned to Thea. I'll take you to your cabin for your supplies, then to the ranch. The magic of the evening dissolved in an instant, replaced by the grim reality of frontier life. Thea nodded, already lifting her skirts to run toward her home. I'll be ready in 5 minutes. The ride to the rocking D was tense and silent. Thea, changed back into her practical clothes and with her medical bag secure, rode alongside Xander and the ranch hand, pushing their horses as fast as was safe in the darkness. Tell me about the injuries, she said as they rode. Riley's the worst. The hand Thea now remembered his name was Cooper replied. Shot high in the chest, right side, having trouble breathing. Davis took one in the left shoulder, lost a fair amount of blood but was conscious when I left. Thea processed this information, planning her approach. Chest wounds were tricky, especially if the lung was involved. And with the remote location, surgical options would be limited. When they reached the ranch, the place was in an uproar despite the late hour. Lanterns blazed in the main house, and several hands were gathered on the porch, their faces grim. Xander helped Thea dismount, then led her quickly inside past the concerned ranch hands. 2 injured men had been laid out in what appeared to be a study, one on a couch, the other on a makeshift pallet on the floor. Thea went immediately to the younger man on the floor, Riley, she presumed. He was pale and gasping, a blood-soaked bandage covering his right upper chest. She knelt beside him, already opening her bag. Riley, she said firmly, I'm Dr. Porter. I'm going to help you, but I need to look at the wound. The young man, barely out of his teens, Thea guessed, nodded weakly. When she removed the bandage, she found a small, neat hole just below his collarbone, bubbling slightly with each labored breath. Not good. He needs to be moved to a table, she said, looking up at Xander. I need better light and access. Without hesitation, Xander cleared a large oak desk, sweeping papers and books to the floor. 2 ranch hands carefully lifted Riley onto it while Thea prepared her instruments. The bullet's still in there, she told Xander as she worked to clean the wound. And it's hit his lung. I need to remove it and repair the damage, or he'll drown in his own blood. Xander's face was grim but composed. What do you need? More light, clean water, whiskey for the wound and for him, and I'll need someone strong to hold him down. This will be excruciating. For the next hour, Thea worked with desperate intensity, probing the wound for the bullet while Riley drifted in and out of consciousness. Xander stayed by her side, holding the young man still when necessary, passing instruments when asked, his presence a steadying force in the chaos. When she finally extracted the bullet, a .44 caliber that had fortunately missed any major blood vessels, Riley was barely conscious, his breathing shallow but less labored. "He needs to be kept still," she instructed as she finished bandaging the wound. "The lung will heal, but any exertion could start the bleeding again, and watch for fever." Only then did she turn her attention to Davis, the second wounded man. His injury was less severe, a clean shot through the shoulder that had missed bone and major vessels. After cleaning and bandaging the wound, she gave him strict instructions to rest and keep the arm immobilized. It was nearly dawn by the time Thea finished treating both men. The ranch hands had dispersed, leaving only Xander and the ranch owner, Thomas Douglas, in the study with her. "You've done a remarkable job, Dr. Porter," Douglas said, his weathered face showing both gratitude and concern. "We're in your debt." "They're not out of danger yet," Thea cautioned, washing blood from her hands in a basin of water. "Especially Riley. He'll need constant monitoring for the next few days." "We'll see to it," Douglas assured her, "and we'll get word to the sheriff about the raiders." "This is the third attack in as many weeks," Xander said, his voice tight with anger. "They're getting bolder." Douglas nodded grimly. "We'll discuss that later. For now, you should take Dr. Porter home. She's had a long night." Thea wanted to protest that she could stay to monitor Riley, but exhaustion was setting in, making her hands tremble slightly as she packed her bag. "I'll return this evening to check on them," she said, as Xander led her outside to where their horses waited. The eastern sky was lightening to a pale gray as they rode back toward Cedar Springs. Thea fought to stay alert in the saddle, the events of the night, the dance, the interrupted moment with Xander, the desperate surgery all blurring together in her tired mind. "You were amazing back there," Xander said, breaking the silence between them. "Riley would have died without you." "He still might," Thea replied soberly. "Chest wounds are unpredictable. But he has a fighting chance now, because of you." They rode the rest of the way in silence, both too exhausted for conversation. When they reached Thea's cabin, Xander insisted on seeing her inside, making sure her stove was lit against the morning chill before preparing to leave. "Xander," Thea said, stopping him at the door, "before we were interrupted last night, you were going to ask me something." He looked at her for a long moment, his blue eyes serious in the early morning light. "It'll keep," he said finally. "You need rest now. I'll check on you this afternoon." As he left, Thea found herself staring at the closed door, wondering what question had been on his lips under the starlit sky and whether the moment for asking it had passed. Over the next 2 weeks, life in Cedar Springs fell into a new pattern. Thea divided her time between her regular patients and daily visits to the Rocking D, where young Riley fought for his life against infection and fever. Davis recovered quickly, but Riley's condition fluctuated daily, giving hope one day only to sink into crisis the next. Through it all, Xander was a constant presence, riding into town to update Thea on Riley's condition when she couldn't make the journey herself, helping her change bandages and administer medications, and ensuring she ate and rested during the long vigils at the ranch. The easy companionship they'd begun to develop before the shooting deepened into something more profound, a partnership forged in crisis. The townspeople noticed, of course. Cedar Springs was too small for secrets. But instead of disapproval, Thea found herself met with knowing smiles and quiet support. "That Daniels fellow is sweet on you," Martha Hawkins observed during a checkup visit to her husband. "The whole town's talking about it." "Mr. Daniels and I work well together," Thea replied, focusing on rewrapping Jacob's leg to hide her blush. "Is that what they're calling it these days?" Jacob teased. "Working well together." "That's quite enough, Mr. Hawkins," Thea said firmly, though she couldn't quite suppress her smile. "How's the pain today?" It wasn't until Riley finally turned the corner, his fever breaking after 12 tense days, that Thea allowed herself to truly relax. She was sitting on the rocking DTK's porch, watching the sunset after delivering the good news to Mr. Douglas, when Xander joined her. "Douglas says you've declared Riley out of danger," he said, sitting beside her on the porch steps. Thea nodded, stretching tired muscles. Barring any setbacks, he should recover fully. He's young and strong. Thanks to you, she shook her head. We did it together, Xander. I couldn't have managed without your help. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the sky turned from gold to deep crimson. I've been thinking, Xander said finally, about what you said when you first came to Cedar Springs about being the only doctor for 100 miles. What about it? Seems to me that's too much territory for one doctor to cover, even one as capable as you. Thea sighed. I've thought the same, but there aren't many doctors willing to practice in places like this. Most prefer cities with proper hospitals and paying patients. What if there was a way to reach more people, to bring them to you rather than you trying to reach them all? She turned to look at him, curious. What are you suggesting? A proper clinic, Xander said, his eyes alight with the idea. Not just your cabin, but a real medical facility. With beds for patients who need to stay, a surgery, maybe even a small ward for contagious cases. The concept was so unexpected, yet so perfectly aligned with Thea's unspoken dreams that she couldn't respond immediately. You've already proven what you can do, Xander continued. The Rocking D would contribute to such a venture. I'm certain other ranches would too once they understood the benefit. Having proper medical care nearby is in everyone's interest. It would take money, Thea said slowly, allowing herself to consider the possibility. And a suitable building. The old mercantile on Pine Street has been empty since Mercer moved to the new location. It's solid, has plenty of space. Thea stared at him. You've really thought about this. Been thinking about a lot of things lately, Xander admitted, holding her gaze. About the future. About what matters. Something in his tone made Thea's heart quicken. And what have you decided matters, Mr. Daniels? You, he said simply. Us, what we could build together. The directness of his answer took her breath away. Xander, that night at the dance, he continued, before we were interrupted. I was going to ask if you might consider a life with me, not just working together but building something permanent, a partnership in every sense. Thea felt as though the world had suddenly narrowed to just this moment, just this man sitting beside her in the fading light. Are you asking me to marry you, Xander Daniels? She asked softly. I reckon I am. He took her hand in his touch gentle despite his calloused fingers. I know it hasn't been all that long by some standards, but out here we learn to recognize what's true and hold on to it, and what I feel for you, Thea Porter, is the truest thing I've ever known. Tears pricked at Thea's eyes. Most men wouldn't want a wife who's also a doctor. Who might be called away at any hour, whose hands are often elbow-deep in other people's blood. I'm not most men, Xander replied with a hint of a smile. And I wouldn't want you to be anything but exactly who you are, the doctor who saves lives, who fights for her patients, who never gives up. He paused. The woman I love. The words hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Thea looked at their joined hands, thinking of all the times they'd worked side by side, how they'd developed a rhythm and understanding that went beyond words. I've never considered marriage, she admitted. I always thought I'd have to choose medicine or a family, not both. Why not both? Xander asked. We'd figure it out together, that clinic you want to build, we could make it happen. A place where you could practice medicine and still have a home, a family. The vision he painted was so compelling, so different from the lonely future Thea had resigned herself to, that she felt her carefully constructed defenses beginning to crumble. I need time to think, she said finally. This is unexpected, Xander nodded, squeezing her hand gently before releasing it. Take all the time you need, I'm not going anywhere. The journey back to town that evening was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. When they reached Thea's cabin, Xander dismounted to help her down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Thank you for everything you've done for Riley, he said, for all of us at the Rocking D. It's my job, Thea replied, though they both knew it had become much more than that. Good night, Dr. Porter, he said formally, though his eyes held a warmth that belied the formality. Good night, Mr. Daniels. As she watched him ride away, Thea Porter realized with startling clarity that she already knew her answer. Had perhaps known it for months, through every patient he'd brought to her, every crisis they'd weathered together, every quiet moment of understanding that had passed between them. She just needed the courage to embrace it. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Thea's door. Sheriff Miller stood on her porch, hat in hand, his expression grave. "Doc," he greeted her. "Got some news you should hear." "Come in, Sheriff," Thea invited, immediately concerned. "Is someone hurt?" "Not yet," Miller said grimly, following her inside. "But I've got word the Blackwell gang is headed this way." Thea felt a chill at the name. The Blackwell gang was notorious in the territory, ruthless outlaws who specialized in cattle rustling but weren't above murder, rape, or any other crime that suited their purposes. "The raiders who attacked the Rocking D," she guessed. Miller nodded. "Looks that way." One of their former members turned himself in over in Clearwater, looking for leniency. Says they're planning something big, a raid on multiple ranches, including the Rocking D. "When?" "Soon. Maybe as early as tonight. I'm gathering a posse, but I wanted to warn you. Might be injuries. Might be worse." Thea was already mentally inventorying her supplies. "I'll be ready. Have you warned the ranches?" "Heading to the Rocking D next," Miller confirmed. "Daniels will want to know." After the sheriff left, Thea moved with purposeful efficiency, preparing bandages, mixing additional batches of antiseptic solution, and organizing her surgical instruments. If the Blackwell gang was as dangerous as their reputation suggested, she needed to be prepared for the worst. She was in the middle of these preparations when the door to her clinic burst open. Xander stood there, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. "Miller found you," Thea said, relief washing over her at the sight of him. "Just left the ranch," Xander confirmed. "Douglas is organizing the hands, setting up defenses." He crossed the room to her, taking her by the shoulders. "I want you to come to the ranch. It's safer there with more men." "I can't leave town," Thea protested. "If there's fighting, people here might need me." "Thea, please." There was real fear in his eyes now. "The Blackwells don't care who they hurt. If they raid the town, all the more reason for me to stay," she insisted. "The townspeople will need a doctor if the worst happens." Xander ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met." Despite the tension of the moment, Thea found herself smiling. "Part of my charm, I'm told." He looked at her for a long moment, then sighed in resignation. "At least let me send a couple of men to guard the clinic." "That I can agree to," she conceded. "As long as they understand I may need to leave if I'm called to help someone." "They'll understand," Xander promised. He hesitated, then added, "About what I asked you yesterday, now is hardly the time," Thea interrupted gently. "Now might be the only time," he countered. "If something happens, nothing's going to happen," she said firmly, placing her hand on his chest. "We'll talk after this is over, I promise." He covered her hand with his own, holding it against his heart. "I'll hold you to that, Dr. Porter." Before she could respond, he leaned down and kissed her, a brief, fierce press of his lips against hers that left her breathless. "For luck," he said with a half smile as he pulled away. "I'll send those men within the hour." And then he was gone, leaving Thea standing in her clinic, fingers pressed to her lips, heart racing with emotions she couldn't begin to sort through amidst the looming threat. The afternoon passed in tense preparation. True to his word, Xander sent 2 armed ranch hands to guard Thea's clinic. They positioned themselves discreetly, one on her small porch, the other around back while she continued gathering supplies. As dusk fell, an uneasy quiet settled over Cedar Springs. The sheriff had spread the word, and most townspeople had barricaded themselves in their homes. A few men with rifles had taken up positions at strategic points around town, but Thea knew they would be no match for hardened outlaws if the Blackwell gang chose to raid the settlement. She was just lighting additional lamps in her surgery when the distant sound of gunfire broke the silence. It came from the direction of the Rocking D. "It started," said the ranch hand on her porch, his hand moving to his revolver. Thea's heart constricted with fear for Xander and the others at the ranch, but she forced herself to remain calm. "If they bring wounded, we need to be ready." The wait was excruciating. More gunfire echoed across the prairie, sometimes intensifying, sometimes falling silent for long minutes. Thea found herself pacing, unable to focus on any task for long, her mind filled with terrible images of Xander lying wounded or worse. It was well past midnight when they heard horses approaching at a gallop. The ranch hands took up defensive positions but soon relaxed as they recognized the riders. "It's Cooper," one said with relief, "and Davis." The two rocking D-men pulled up in front of the clinic, a third horse in tow with a body draped across the saddle. "Doc," Cooper called urgently. "We need help." Thea rushed out, dread filling her at the sight of the motionless form. "Who is it?" "Matthews," Davis replied as they carefully lowered the wounded man. "Took a bullet in the back." Relief that it wasn't Xander was immediately replaced by professional concern as she helped them carry Matthews inside. The wound was serious, a bullet lodged near the spine, but not immediately fatal if she could control the bleeding and prevent infection. As she worked on Matthews, Cooper updated her on the situation at the ranch. "Blackwell's hit us hard, but we were ready. They weren't expecting so much resistance. Last I saw, they were retreating, but the fighting spread. Some of them headed toward the Carson place." "And Xander?" Thea asked, trying to keep her voice steady as she probed for the bullet. "He was fine when we left," Cooper assured her, "leading a group to help the Carsons. Told us to bring Matthews to you right away." She nodded, focusing on her patient. "This bullet needs to come out now. I'll need your help." For the next hour, Thea operated on Matthews while Cooper and Davis assisted, following her instructions with grim determination. By the time she'd extracted the bullet and closed the wound, dawn was breaking outside. "He'll need careful monitoring," she told the men as she washed blood from her hands. "But if infection doesn't set in, he should recover." The men exchanged glances. "Doc," Davis said hesitantly, "we should get back to the ranch in case they need us." "Go," she said, understanding their duty. "I'll take care of Matthews." They had just mounted up when more riders appeared on the horizon, a larger group this time, moving more slowly. As they drew closer, Thea could make out Sheriff Miller at the front, followed by several townsmen and rocking D hands. Among them was Xander, supporting another rider who was slumped in his saddle. Thea felt a rush of relief at the sight of him, apparently unharmed, but it was short-lived as the group reached her clinic, and she saw the extent of the injuries. 3 men were wounded, 1 shot in the leg, another with a deep gash across his forehead, and the third, the man Xander was supporting, with what appeared to be multiple gunshot wounds to the torso. "Blackwell's are done," Miller announced grimly as they dismounted. 4 dead, 3 captured. "Rest scattered." Thea was already directing the wounded into her clinic. "Any casualties on our side?" 2 of Carson's hands didn't make it, the sheriff replied. "This here's his son, Jesse, took 3 bullets trying to defend their home." Xander helped carry the young man inside, his face streaked with dirt and gunpowder. "He needs you, Thea," he said quietly. "He's hanging on by a thread." For the next several hours, Thea worked frantically to save Jesse Carson's life, extracting bullets, repairing damaged tissue, and fighting to stop the bleeding that threatened to claim him with each passing minute. Xander stayed by her side throughout, handing her instruments, holding pressure on wounds, and offering quiet encouragement when her energy flagged. By mid-morning, she had done all she could for Jesse and the other wounded men. Matthews and the man with the leg wound were stable. The one with the head injury was conscious and alert, but Jesse Carson remained critical, his pulse weak and erratic despite her best efforts. "I've done everything possible," she told Xander as they stepped outside for a moment of fresh air. "The rest is up to him now." Xander nodded, his face etched with fatigue. "You've given him a chance. That's more than he had before." Now that the immediate crisis had passed, Thea took a moment to really look at Xander. Though he'd claimed to be uninjured, she noticed he was favoring his left side, and there was a tear in his shirt that looked suspiciously like a bullet graze. "You're hurt," she accused, reaching for the torn fabric. "It's nothing," he tried to dismiss, but winced when her fingers probed the area. "Inside, now," she ordered in her doctor's voice. "That needs cleaning at the very least." Too exhausted to argue, Xander followed her back into the crowded clinic. She cleared a space in her small examining room and made him remove his shirt, revealing a deep furrow along his rib cage where a bullet had grazed him. "Nothing," he says, Thea muttered as she cleaned the wound. "This could easily have become infected." "Had more important things to worry about," Xander replied, watching her work with a tenderness that made her hands falter momentarily. Well, now I'm worried about you, she said firmly. Hold still, this will sting. As she applied antiseptic to the wound, Xander caught her wrist gently. Thea. Look at me. She raised her eyes to his, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of his bare chest under her hands, of the intensity in his gaze. I thought about you the whole time, he said quietly. During the fighting, kept thinking I had to make it back, had to see you again. Xander, I know this isn't the time, he continued. But after last night, I'm not sure I want to wait for the right time anymore. Life's too uncertain out here. Before she could respond, a commotion from the main room interrupted them. Jesse Carson had taken a turn for the worse. Thea hurriedly bandaged Xander's wound and rushed to her patient's side, pushing her personal feelings aside as she fought once more to save the young man's life. It was late afternoon before the crisis passed. Jesse stabilized, though he remained unconscious. The other wounded men were resting as comfortably as possible in the crowded conditions. Sheriff Miller had returned to report that the captured Blackwell gang members were secure in the town jail, awaiting transport to the territorial court. Thea finally allowed herself to sit, her legs trembling with exhaustion after nearly 24 hours of continuous work. Xander brought her a cup of coffee and a plate of food that someone from town had delivered. You need to rest, he said, sitting beside her. You can't help anyone if you collapse. I'm fine, she protested, though she couldn't stifle a yawn. Just need a moment to catch my breath. More than a moment, Xander insisted. Davis and Cooper can watch the patients. I'll take you home. Too tired to argue, Thea allowed him to escort her back to her cabin, which seemed eerily quiet after the chaos of the clinic. She sank into her rocking chair while Xander built up the fire in her stove. You should rest too, she said, watching him move about her small home with easy familiarity. You've been up as long as I have. I will, he promised. Once I know you're settled. As the warmth from the stove filled the room, Thea felt the events of the past 24 hours catching up with her. The fear, the intensity of fighting to save lives, the relief of seeing Xander alive, it all swirled together, breaking through her carefully maintained composure. To her mortification, tears began sliding down her cheeks. She brushed them away impatiently, but they kept coming. Thea. Xander was kneeling before her chair in an instant, his face concerned. Are you hurt? No, she managed through the tears. I was so afraid you wouldn't come back, understanding dawned in his eyes. Without a word, he gathered her into his arms, holding her against his chest as the emotional storm broke fully. Thea clung to him, her tears soaking his shirt, while he stroked her hair and murmured soothing words. When the tears finally subsided, she remained in his embrace, drawing comfort from his solid presence. I'm sorry, she said eventually, her voice muffled against his shoulder. I don't usually. That is, I'm not typically so emotional. Xander pulled back just enough to look at her, brushing a strand of hair from her damp cheek. Don't apologize, not to me, not ever. The tenderness in his voice undid her carefully constructed defenses. My answer is yes, she said suddenly. He stilled, his hand warm against her face. Yes. To what you asked me, about building a life together, my answer is yes. For a moment, Xander simply stared at her, as if unable to believe what he'd heard. Then a slow smile spread across his face, transforming his tired features into something so beautiful it made Thea's heart ache. Are you certain? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. I don't want you agreeing because of what happened, because you were afraid. I'm saying yes because I love you, Thea interrupted, the words coming easily now that she'd finally admitted them to herself. Because I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore, because you respect me as a doctor and as a woman. Because the rest of her reasons were lost as Xander kissed her, a kiss so full of longing and promise that it left no doubt of his feelings. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he pressed his forehead to hers. I love you, Theodora Porter, he said. Have since the day you dug that bullet out of my shoulder and told me I was the most stubborn patient you'd ever treated. Thea laughed softly at the memory. You were. You still are. Takes one to know one, Doc. She couldn't argue with that assessment. Instead, she kissed him again, savoring the feeling of rightness of coming home after a long journey. Later, as Xander prepared to return to the clinic to check on the wounded men, they stood together on her porch, reluctant to part despite their exhaustion. "When this is all over," he said, "when the wounded are healed and things settle down, I want to start planning that clinic we talked about." Thea looked up at him, touched by his commitment to her dream. "You were serious about that, about everything I said," he confirmed. "The clinic, a home together, all of it." "It won't be easy," she cautioned. "A woman doctor is still a novelty out here, a married woman doctor even more so." "Since when do you take the easy path?" Xander challenged with a smile. "Besides, this whole territory is changing, growing. The people here need someone like you, someone who cares, who fights for them." "They need both of us," Thea corrected. "We're a good team, Mr. Daniels, the best doctor." "Porter," he kissed her once more before settling his hat on his head. "Get some rest. I'll be back by nightfall." As she watched him walk away, Thea Porter felt a sense of peace and possibility that had eluded her for most of her life. For the first time, the future stretched before her not as a lonely path of professional dedication, but as a shared journey with a man who respected her skills, supported her dreams, and loved her for exactly who she was. The town of Cedar Springs would never be the same, and neither would she. In the months that followed the defeat of the Blackwell gang, Cedar Springs underwent a transformation. Word of Dr. Porter's skill in treating the wounded, and of the townspeople and ranchers who had come together to defend their homes spread throughout the territory, bringing new settlers and businesses to the growing community. True to his word, Xander worked alongside Thea to establish a proper medical clinic in the old mercantile building on Pine Street. The Rocking D contributed lumber and labor, while other ranches and businesses in the area provided funds for equipment and supplies. By winter, the Cedar Springs Medical Clinic was a reality, a clean, well-organized facility with 6 patient beds, a surgery, and a small laboratory where Thea could prepare medications. Their wedding took place on a crisp October day, with the aspen trees glowing gold against the blue Wyoming sky. Martha Hawkins organized the celebration, while Sheriff Miller stood as Xander's best man. Young Jesse Carson, fully recovered from his near-fatal wounds, played the fiddle for their first dance as husband and wife. "Never thought I'd see the day," Jacob Hawkins commented to his wife as they watched the newlyweds dance. "Our Lady Doctor and the Rocking D foreman, who'd have guessed it? Anyone with eyes in their head," Martha replied with satisfaction. "Those two were made for each other." By spring of 1877, the clinic was flourishing. Thea had hired a young woman from town, Emma Wilson, as a nurse's assistant, training her in basic medical procedures and record keeping. The arrangement allowed Thea to continue making house calls to patients too ill to travel, while ensuring the clinic remained staffed. Xander, meanwhile, had been promoted to manager of the Rocking DTKS operations after Thomas Douglas decided to spend more time in Cheyenne with his growing grandchildren. The new position gave him more flexibility to assist Thea when needed, though he was careful to never overstep or undermine her authority in medical matters. They made their home in rooms above the clinic, converting the space into a comfortable apartment that allowed Thea to respond quickly to medical emergencies, while still maintaining some separation between their professional and personal lives. It was in these rooms on a quiet evening in late April that Thea confirmed what she had begun to suspect for several weeks. "Xander," she said as they sat together by the fire after a long day, "I have something to tell you." He looked up from the book he'd been reading, his expression curious. "What is it?" Thea took a deep breath, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her still flat abdomen. "I believe we're going to have a child, in late November by my calculations." For a moment, Xander simply stared at her, the book forgotten in his lap. Then a smile of such pure joy spread across his face that Thea felt tears spring to her eyes. "A baby," he whispered, setting aside the book and moving to kneel before her chair. "We're having a baby," she nodded, her own smile matching his. "Yes, I'm quite certain." Xander placed his hand gently over hers. "Are you happy about this? I know your work at the clinic. I'm very happy," she assured him. "Surprised, perhaps, that it's happening so soon, but happy nonetheless. We'll figure everything out, he promised, pressing a kiss to her palm. The clinic, your practice, whatever you need to make this work. I know we will, Thea said, confident in their ability to face this new challenge together. Emma's training is coming along well, and perhaps it's time to consider bringing in another doctor to help with the growing practice. Another lady doctor, Xander suggested with a grin. Thea laughed. Perhaps, though I imagine Cedar Springs might need some time to adjust to the idea of two-woman doctors. They adjusted to you, he pointed out. Eventually. With considerable help from a certain persistent cowboy, she reminded him. As the months passed and Thea's pregnancy progressed, the people of Cedar Springs rallied around their doctor in ways that would have seemed unimaginable 2 years earlier. Martha Hawkins organized a group of women to help at the clinic, ensuring Thea could rest when needed. Sheriff Miller spread the word to neighboring communities that the clinic would be operating on a limited schedule as Dr. Porter's confinement approached. Even Thomas Douglas made a special trip from Cheyenne, bringing with him a young doctor he'd met there, Dr. Sarah Bennett, a recent graduate of the Women's Medical College, who was eager for an opportunity to practice in a community that had already accepted a female physician. Consider it a gift for the baby, Douglas told them when he introduced Dr. Bennett. Every child deserves to have their mother's full attention in those early months. Dr. Bennett proved to be a capable physician with a quiet competence that quickly earned the town's respect. By November, when Thea's time drew near, the transition was smooth enough that she could step back from her duties with minimal disruption to patient care. On a snowy night in late November, after a labor that Thea would later describe as mercifully straightforward, if not exactly comfortable, their son was born. They named him Samuel Thomas Daniels, Samuel for Thea's father, and Thomas for the man who had given Xander his start at the Rocking D and who had supported their vision for the clinic. He's perfect, Xander whispered as he held his son for the first time, awe evident in every line of his face. Thea, he's absolutely perfect. He has your eyes, she observed tiredly, watching her husband cradle their newborn with hands that had once seemed too rough for such a delicate task, but now moved with natural gentleness. And your determination, Xander replied with a chuckle as the infant gripped his finger with surprising strength. Look at that grip, he'll be holding a scalpel before we know it. Or a lasso, Thea countered, smiling at the picture they made together. Either way, Xander said, sitting carefully beside her on the bed, he'll know he can be anything he chooses, just like his mother taught me. As winter gave way to spring, and spring blossomed into summer, the Daniels family settled into a rhythm that balanced Thea's gradual return to medical practice, Xander's responsibilities at the ranch, and the joys and challenges of raising young Samuel, Dr. Bennett chose to stay in Cedar Springs, having found both professional fulfillment and a personal connection with the community. She took on more responsibility at the clinic, allowing Thea to focus on the more complex cases and to continue her efforts to improve medical care in the region. On Samuel's first birthday, with the clinic thriving and their little family flourishing, Xander surprised Thea with a deed to a piece of land on the edge of town large enough for a proper house with room for expansion, yet close enough to the clinic for easy access. I thought it was time we had a real home, he explained as they stood on the property, Samuel balanced on Xander's hip. Somewhere with a yard for Sam to play, maybe some brothers and sisters someday if you'd like that. Thea looked out over the land, imagining the possibilities: a comfortable home filled with love and laughter, close enough to her work but separate enough to provide a sanctuary for their family. It's perfect, she said, leaning into his side. Though I hope you don't expect me to retire to domestic bliss entirely, Xander laughed, the sound still her favorite after all this time. I wouldn't dream of it, Dr. Daniels. This town needs you too much. I need you too much, exactly as you are. And who am I? She asked, curious about how he saw her after these years together. You're the only woman doctor for 100 miles, he said, echoing the phrase that had once been whispered around town with skepticism, but was now spoken with pride. You're the woman who saved countless lives, including mine. You're my wife, Sam's mother, and the strongest person I know." Thea felt tears prick her eyes at his words. "And you, Xander Daniels, are the man who saw my value when others didn't, who brought me patience and your respect when both were in short supply." "Best decisions I ever made," he said simply, bending to kiss her as Samuel babbled happily between them. As they stood together on the land that would become their home, with the town of Cedar Springs spreading out below them and the vast Wyoming sky above, Thea reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a skeptical community's reluctant acceptance of a woman doctor to a thriving medical practice, from a wounded cowboy seeking help to a husband and father who supported her dreams, from isolation to belonging. "What are you thinking?" Xander asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "That I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," Thea replied, taking Samuel from his arms and breathing in the sweet scent of her son's hair. "With exactly who I'm supposed to be with." The family they built and the legacy they created would endure long after them, a testament to what could be achieved when respect blossomed into love, and when two determined spirits found in each other not just a partner, but a home. In Cedar Springs, Wyoming Territory, the story of the woman doctor and the cowboy who brought her patience and his respect became something of a legend, a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most beautiful endings. And for Theodora and Xander Daniels, it wasn't an ending at all, but rather the ongoing story of a life well lived together.